Nobody wants to admit it yet, but something big is happening in Cleveland, and it has nothing to do with the coaching circus everyone keeps arguing about. While the media is busy chasing rumors, debating head coach names, and recycling the same tired takes, the Cleveland Browns quietly sent a message that changes everything. And if you missed it, you're not alone, because almost everyone did. For years, Cleveland has been the punchline. Bad decisions, wasted talent, and a front office that always felt one step behind. But this offseason feels different, not loud, not flashy, just deliberate. Because when a team shows you who they're building for, you should believe them. And right now, all signs point to one name, Shedeur Sanders. Here's the part nobody's connecting. Teams don't invest early, they don't move in silence, and they definitely don't stack one side of the ball unless they already know what's coming next. This isn't Cleveland panicking. This is Cleveland preparing to protect someone, preparing to support someone, preparing to finally stop sabotaging their own quarterback. And no, this isn't about hype or blind optimism. This is about patterns. Front offices tell the truth with their actions long before they ever say it out loud. And Bari just tipped his hand quietly, efficiently, and without needing a single headline. Think about it, you don't build depth without direction, you don't load up unless you expect pressure, and you don't change your entire approach unless the quarterback changes everything. Cleveland isn't guessing anymore, they're committing. But here, where it gets interesting, because this move wasn't made for headlines, it wasn't made for fans, and it definitely wasn't made for the media. It was made for the locker room. And once you understand why, the rest of this offseason suddenly makes a lot more sense. While everyone else was glued to the coaching carousel, something far more important was happening behind the scenes and almost nobody noticed. Turn on any sports show, scroll social media, or skim headlines, and it's the same recycled debate. Who's the next head coach? Is Cleveland chasing a big-name savior? Can one hire magically fix years of dysfunction? That noise has completely drowned out the real story. Because while the media obsessed over rumors and hypotheticals, the Cleveland Browns weren't talking at all. They were moving, quietly, intentionally, and that silence wasn't confusion, it was clarity. This is how front offices operate when they actually know what they're doing. Chaos happens in public, planning happens in private, and Cleveland chose privacy. No leaks, no hype, no desperate PR tour, just action, and that alone should tell you something has changed. Here's the part that should make people uncomfortable. Media narratives thrive on drama, not structure. Coaching rumors are easy clicks, quarterback panic sells, but roster construction, that doesn't trend, that doesn't go viral. And that's exactly why this flew under the radar. The Browns weren't feeding the content machine, they were building leverage. And if you think that's accidental, it's not. Because teams that are uncertain talk a lot. Teams that are panicking leak constantly. Teams that don't trust their quarterback float competition narratives. Cleveland did none of that. Instead, they quietly reinforced one side of the ball, the side that directly supports Shedeur Sanders, while everyone else was distracted by smoke. That's not coincidence, that's strategy. This is where the disconnect happens. Fans are trained to look for splash moves. Media is trained to chase drama, but front offices speak a different language. They tell the truth through timing, through priorities, through what they fix first, and Cleveland fixed a fence before fixing optics. That tells you they already know what matters most. And at the center of that decision is Bari, a guy who doesn't need headlines to do his job. While outsiders argued about leadership, Bari addressed stability. While pundits debated hypotheticals, he handled infrastructure. Because once you understand this league, you realize something simple. Coaches shape systems, but quarterbacks shape timelines. And Cleveland isn't acting like a team searching for answers anymore. They're acting like a team protecting one. And once you see that, the rest of this offseason stops looking random and starts looking planned. While the spotlight stayed locked on the coaching search, Bari made a move that most fans barely noticed, and that's exactly why it mattered. No press conference, no dramatic announcement, just 6 quiet signings that told a much louder story than any headline ever could. On paper, it looks boring. Reserve future contracts, practice squad-level names, nothing that trends, but that surface-level reaction misses the point entirely. Because in the NFL, timing is truth, and teams don't move early unless they already know where they're headed. Here, what makes this different? Bari didn't sprinkle signings across the roster, he didn't hedge his bets. He went all in on one side of the ball, every single move was a fence. tight ends, receivers, linemen, a running back, 6 bodies, 1 direction. That's not depth building, that's preparation. This is how real roster construction starts. Not in March when money is flying everywhere, not in April when cameras are rolling. It starts in January when no one's watching, when the season's barely over, and when front offices show their hand without saying a word. That's when intent shows up. And the intent here was crystal clear. Teams unsure about their quarterback don't do this. They stall, they evaluate, they leak competition narratives to protect themselves, but the Cleveland Browns didn't hesitate. They didn't slow-walk it. They moved immediately to reinforce the infrastructure around the offense, the part of the team that directly impacts the quarterback's success. That tells you everything. These contracts aren't about locking in starters, they're auditions, controlled chaos, hunger-based competition that doesn't cost cap space but creates leverage. Bari is stacking bodies so training camp becomes survival of the fittest. No comfort, no entitlement, earn it or get replaced. And here's the key detail most people miss. You only create that environment when you trust who's under center. Because competition everywhere else works only if the quarterback is steady. And whether people want to admit it or not, this move aligns perfectly with Shedeur Sanders being the long-term plan. Bari isn't gambling, he's insulating. He's giving himself options, depth, and flexibility before the real spending begins. This isn't the finished product, it's the foundation. And foundations don't get applause, they just determine whether the house stands. And once you realize that, these 6 quiet signings stop looking small and start looking intentional. Here's the detail that changes everything. Not one of those 6 signings was on defense, not a single one, and that wasn't an accident, oversight, or coincidence. That was a statement. The Cleveland Browns didn't need to fix their defense. That side of the ball already knows who it is. Under Jim Schwartz, the identity has been clear. Pressure, discipline, physicality. You've got Myles Garrett wrecking game plans, a secondary that can hold its own, and a unit that's rarely the reason games slip away. When Cleveland loses, it's usually not because the defense collapsed. So the front office made a choice, and choices tell the truth. They went offense-only, tight ends, wide receivers, linemen, a running back, every move pointed in one direction. That's not balance, that's priority. That's an organization finally admitting where the real problem has been all along. For years, Cleveland tried to patch the offense with half measures. One receiver here, one lineman there, temporary fixes stacked on top of unstable foundations. And every time things fell apart, the quarterback took the blame. This time feels different because the approach is different. Teams that are unsure at quarterback spread resources everywhere. They hedge, they protect themselves, but teams that believe in their quarterback do something else entirely. They overcorrect around him, they remove excuses, they build margin, they make it impossible to point the finger anywhere else. That's exactly what this looks like. And this is where Shedeur Sanders quietly enters the conversation again, because you don't overload offense unless you're confident the quarterback can elevate it. You don't stockpile pass catchers and blockers if you're planning to reset the position in April. That would be organizational malpractice. Instead, Cleveland treated the offense like a fragile asset that needs protection, support, and depth. Because they've already seen what happens when talent is thin. They've seen drives die on drops. They've seen pressure collapse pockets. They've seen momentum swing because someone didn't win a one-on-one. So they addressed it early. This isn't about stars yet, this is about structure, about creating a competitive environment where nothing is guaranteed and everything is earned. And once that's in place, the big moves make sense. Because when the foundation is offense first, everything that comes next gets a lot more dangerous. And that's when things really start to get interesting. Here's the part nobody wants to say out loud, because once you say it, the entire offseason looks different. Moves like this don't happen unless the quarterback question is already answered internally. Teams can talk about evaluating the position all they want, but actions tell the truth long before press conferences ever do. And the actions from the Cleveland Browns point in one direction. You don't pour resources into offensive depth this early if you're planning to hit reset at quarterback. You don't stockpile pass catchers, tight ends, and linemen in January if you expect a rookie to walk in and figure it out on the fly. That's not how NFL front offices operate. That's how franchises stay stuck in neutral. Instead, this looks like insulation, protection, preparation. The kind of groundwork you lay when you believe the most important position is already spoken for. Now, to be clear, reports still say Cleveland will evaluate the quarterback market. That's standard language. Every team says it. It's insurance. It keeps options open and leverage intact. But what they're not doing matters just as much. There's no public panic, no aggressive smoke about moving up in the draft, no desperation energy, just calm, methodical reinforcement around the offense. And that calm lines up perfectly with Shedeur Sanders. Think about what Cleveland has already seen. They've seen him operate under pressure. They've seen him extend plays when protection breaks down. They've seen accuracy hold up even when separation doesn't exist. They've seen composure when drives fall apart through no fault of his own. Those aren't theoretical traits, those are live reps. So instead of asking, "Can this guy play?" the front office shifted to a different question: how do we make this easier? That's the real signal. This isn't a team building a roster to find a quarterback. This is a team shaping a roster for one. There's a difference. One is reactive, the other is intentional, and intentional teams don't accidentally reveal their plan, they just quietly execute it. That doesn't mean Shedeur is beyond scrutiny. It doesn't mean there's zero competition. But it does mean the organization is acting like they've already chosen a direction. And when teams reach that point, everything else becomes secondary. The draft, free agency, coaching hires, all of it starts orbiting the quarterback. And right now, Cleveland's orbit is telling a very specific story, even if they're not ready to say it yet. When Deion Sanders first talked about bringing Louis Vuitton luggage with him, most people took it as trash talk, a flashy quote, a soundbite built for headlines. But over time, it became clear that it wasn't about fashion at all, it was about standards, about expectation, about refusing to lower the bar just to fit in. And that mindset didn't stay in college. Because Shedeur Sanders carries that same energy into every locker room he walks into. Not loud, not reckless, just demanding of himself first and then of everyone around him. That's the part some organizations struggle with, because when a quarterback knows what winning looks like, mediocrity gets exposed fast. This is where the luggage metaphor really hits. It's not about ego, it's about pressure. When Shedeur shows up, excuses leave. You can't hide behind bad spacing, lazy routes, or mental lapses. You can't shrug off drops or blown assignments and call it growing pains. Everything gets magnified, and for some players, that's uncomfortable. But for the right ones, it's fuel. That's why this offseason matters. Cleveland isn't just adding bodies, they're reshaping the environment. Competition, accountability, hunger, that's what follows quarterbacks like Shedeur, and it's what separates teams that talk about culture from teams that actually enforce it. You've heard the comparison before, and it's worth revisiting: the need for Travis Hunter-type receivers. Not necessarily the same player, but the same mindset. Guys who attack the ball, guys who don't wait for perfect throws, guys who turn chaos into advantage. Because that's how Shedeur plays. He trusts aggression, he rewards effort. And that standard traces straight back to Deion Sanders. The expectation that if you're on the field, you're there to compete, not survive. When that expectation enters a building, everything changes. Roster spots feel heavier, practices get sharper, and suddenly talent alone isn't enough. That's why some players thrive around quarterbacks like this, and others fade out quickly. Cleveland hasn't always embraced that kind of pressure. For years, comfort was tolerated. Inconsistency was explained away. But this feels different. This feels like an organization preparing for a quarterback who won't accept the usual excuses. The Louis Vuitton luggage isn't flashy anymore. It's functional, it carries expectations. And once it's unpacked, everyone in the room has a choice: elevate or get left behind. And that choice is exactly what Cleveland has been missing. This is the part where most people roll their eyes and stop paying attention, and that's exactly why it matters. Practice squad signings don't trend. Reserve futures contracts don't make highlight reels. But if you think these moves are meaningless, you're missing how real teams are built. Because these players aren't nothing, they're pressure. When Bari brought these guys in, he wasn't filling space, he was manufacturing competition. Controlled competition. Cheap competition, the kind that forces everyone already in the locker room to feel uncomfortable. And discomfort is where improvement actually happens. Here, how this works? Reserve future contracts lock players into the offseason without touching the active roster. That means Cleveland can bring in wave after wave of hungry players without commitment. No guarantees, no politics, just earn it or get replaced. That's not random roster churn, that's leverage. And leverage changes behavior. Suddenly, that wide receiver who coasted through reps knows there's someone behind him willing to fight for snaps. That tight end who blocked well enough now has to actually threaten defenses. That lineman who relied on seniority has to hold his ground every single day. Because the margin for error shrinks fast when bodies stack up. This matters even more when your quarterback is Shedeur Sanders. Quarterbacks like Shedeur don't need perfect rosters, they need reliable ones. They need guys who finish plays, who win late, who don't mentally check out when things get ugly. And the fastest way to find those players isn't by handing out guaranteed money. It's by forcing competition and letting habits reveal themselves. That's what these signings really are, auditions. Not just for roster spots, but for trust. Trust from the coaching staff, trust from the quarterback, trust in high-leverage moments when games swing on one rep. Practice squad players aren't backups, they're filters. They expose who belongs and who doesn't. And this is where Cleveland has failed in the past. Too many spots felt safe. Too many players knew their role wasn't truly threatened. That breeds complacency. This approach kills it. The Cleveland Browns aren't chasing headlines here. They're building an ecosystem where effort is non-negotiable, where snaps are earned daily, where nobody is untouchable outside of the quarterback. That's how depth turns into production, that's how bad habits disappear, and that's how you quietly raise the floor of an entire offense. These signings aren't about who starts in week 1, they're about who survives the process. And when that process gets ruthless, the team around the quarterback gets better, whether people notice it or not. Now comes the part where things get interesting and where we have to be clear about what we know versus what's being talked about. Nothing here is official. No deals are done, but around the league there's already buzz about what Cleveland might be setting up next. Because moves like this don't exist in a vacuum. When teams quietly build depth early, it usually means they're planning to be aggressive later. And there's been growing speculation that the Cleveland Browns are positioning themselves to strike when the market opens, not scramble. That's a big difference. Reports and league chatter suggest Cleveland could be far more active in free agency than fans are used to. Not just bargain hunting, not just short-term patches, but targeted moves, especially at wide receiver, tight end, and along the offensive line. And that lines up with one thing, making life easier for Shedeur Sanders. There's also speculation floating around about potential trades. Nothing concrete, no confirmed targets. But when a team stacks depth the way Cleveland just did, it gives them flexibility. They can absorb contracts, they can shuffle roles, they can make a move without blowing up the locker room. That's usually when front offices feel comfortable picking up the phone. Another thing worth watching is how free agents view Cleveland right now. This matters more than fans realize. Players talk, agents talk, and quarterbacks change perception fast. There have been quiet discussion in league circles that Cleveland may no longer be viewed as a dead-end stop, but as an opportunity, especially for offensive players looking to rebuild value. That doesn't mean stars are lining up at the door, but relevance attracts interest, and relevance starts at quarterback. It's also been said that Cleveland's approach this offseason feels intentionally patient. No rush, no panic, no win the press conference mentality, just layered moves that build toward something bigger. If that's true, then what we've seen so far is only phase 1. And phase 2 is where the noise starts. Free agency brings names, trades bring headlines, the draft brings speculation overload, but the foundation for all of that has already been laid. That's the part most people miss. So while nothing here is guaranteed, the direction feels clear. Cleveland isn't waiting to see what happens, they're preparing to act, and when they do, it's going to make a lot more sense than it would have a few weeks ago. Because once the groundwork is in place, the real moves don't feel random, they feel inevitable. So now comes the uncomfortable question, is this actually enough? 6 reserve contracts, depth moves, competition, foundation, all smart, all necessary, but the NFL doesn't reward almost. And while this offseason already feels different, Cleveland isn't playing in a vacuum. They're in a division with teams that don't wait around for potential to mature. That's where the tension lives. Because on one hand, what the Cleveland Browns are doing finally makes sense. They're building layers, removing excuses, creating an environment where effort matters and comfort disappears. That alone puts them ahead of where they've been for years. But on the other hand, depth without firepower only gets you so far. At some point, the question stops being, are we building correctly? And becomes, are we building aggressively enough? Because Baltimore isn't slowing down, Cincinnati isn't rebuilding, and moral victories don't count in January. This is where Andrew Bari faces his real test. Does he stay patient and trust internal growth, or does he push his chips in and go get a proven difference maker, a receiver who tilts coverage, a tight end defenses actually game plan for, an offensive lineman who changes protection calls before the snap? Those are the moves that separate hopeful teams from dangerous ones. And then there's the quarterback, the center of all of this. Because everything Cleveland is doing only works if Shedeur Sanders continues to rise. Not just statistically, but as the gravitational force of the franchise. The guy teammates rally around, the guy free agents want to play with, the guy opponents prepare differently for. The front office has started removing the obstacles. Now comes the harder part, maximizing the opportunity. Browns fans have heard promises before. They've lived through resets, rebrands, and rebuilds that never quite connected. Skepticism is earned, but this moment feels quieter, more deliberate, less desperate, and sometimes that's exactly how real change starts. This isn't a victory lap, it's not even the finish line, it's a checkpoint. So the real question isn't whether Cleveland can compete, it's whether they're willing to take the final steps required to do it. Because foundation alone doesn't win divisions, execution does. And how this offseason ends will tell us whether this was just another hopeful chapter, or the moment Cleveland finally stopped guessing and started committing. Now it's on them. And that's what makes what comes next impossible to look away from.